Hello, and welcome back to Rosebud Studios, where we talk about all things storytelling. And today I am talking about making comics about that dog right there. Specifically, this is going to be part 1 of 2 of a video showing, like, start to finish, how you make a Webtoons comic. Webtoons is unique and it has that scroll style comic, and there's very specific ways that you make that work. So I'm going to do a walkthrough. Today I'm going to do a walkthrough of the actual drawing of the Webtoons comic. The file formats you need, how you need to make fonts look, different pens that I use, and the like sizes and styles of things, how I create speech bubbles. All of that we're going to cover in this video. Next month, I'm going to do how you take that drawing off of your iPad and turn it into a formatted file that you can then upload to Webtoons or Tapas. Well, it's pretty easy to do both, so I might as well do both. But yeah, let's get started on how you draw a Webtoons comic. I will note I work out of Procreate. I use an iPad. You can use a lot of different things to create the Webtoons comic. People use Clip Studio, they use, I've seen some people use Photoshop. Like, there's a lot of different ways to do it. This is just my way to do it because I have an iPad Pro and it just works really well for me. So let's start with how you make this.
All right, let's get started. I do have a notebook with all of my KC comic scripts written out. I don't necessarily say exactly to what I have written out, but it just gives me an idea of like the number of panels I want and like the general dialogue that I'm going for, so that I'm not having to come up with that on the spot. I have like an idea written out. So that's set there. The first thing we're going to do is create a document that is 1600 by 12,000 pixels. I will put this information in the description, so don't worry about like trying to remember that. And I set it to 300 dpi, and just want to make sure it's not set to CMYK because that's for printing. This is not for printing. Once we have that document created, I drop over my logo. This size, sometimes the logo just decides to go away and then we got to do it all over again. Anyway, this size of document is a good one to like start with for when you're creating that scrollable comic that still gives you a fair amount of layers. Now, of note, obviously I'm using Procreate. I am working off of an iPad Pro. And the key thing that gives me is I have a lot more layers in one document. You don't need to have an iPad Pro. It just enables me to, like, for this size document, I have 30 layers available to me, which I normally don't max out. Occasionally I do for this style of comic, but majority of the time I don't max out. That's a pretty good number of layers. So if you're working on a more personal sized iPad, you just be restricted to the number of layers that you can do per document, which it might just mean you need more documents than you would need to create like the same scroll effect. So we're going to start with the episode title here. For the majority of the text in this comic, I use CMYK hand. I was able to find a free download somewhere. I can't remember where now, but it did have a license available for free that you could use it for commercial and personal uses, which is really important if you're downloading any kind of font or element. You want to make sure that it is available for all uses, not just personal use. CMYK hand is one of the fonts recommended for a Webtoons. There's a lot of people on Reddit who kind of give ideas about what fonts to use and stuff like that. It's really helpful. So CMYK hand was one of their ones that they recommended that I really liked. I use size 18 font with it. You generally want to recommend use between 18 and 24 size font for viewability on a phone. That is your, you want to make sure it's readable if someone's looking at their phone, which a lot of people are. So in general, 18 to 24 in that range is viewable. Now, what I'm doing here is deciding on a color. For this particular style of comic, I use a different color every episode, although I use kind of a range of like blue, green, yellow, purple, that sort of thing. But I have this Pinterest board made up for myself of covers for an old-fashioned magazine called Country Fair. And I love the block colors of this magazine. So when I'm looking to decide what color to do for this week, I just go and I run through here to get some ideas of colors. I do also base it on like what was the most recent round. So I can see I did blue, red, and green recently. So I obviously don't want to have like the same color right up next to each other. So between that and seeing what I did last week, that's how I decide on what color to do this week. Everyone's slightly different. I don't try to match time to time. That's just kind of part of the aesthetic that I do. For the panels that I create with these colors, I use a Bardo brush called Alcohol Marker. It's a Soul set you can get. I really like the set for this particular usage because one, there's like a super wide one that you saw, and two, it has a good texture to it. So the background panels just have a bit of texture. It is a fairly translucent pen, so I usually try to double up and decide like what level of color do I want. So if you see for that one, I tried 2 layers and I like that. It is a type of brush that will double up as you use it. So you want to do a single panel in 1 stroke. If you do 2 strokes, you'll start to see the color layering that you'll see here. So I liked the color at 2 layers. So I just went and duplicated that and merged those 2 together to get the color that I wanted for this particular episode. I do also just like having a clean line. I did a couple without clean lines and I just decided I didn't like them. So I'm just using the eraser tool and the straight line function to go ahead and erase this out. Yeah, I don't know why I manually erase this. There is faster ways to do this. But here you go, manual erasing nonetheless. So this is how I create a panel. I size it to roughly the size of the screen. So like if you have this on a phone or an iPad in the scroll format, this panel is taking up the majority of the screen. Not the whole thing, but the majority of the screen is taken up by this panel. Now, as we have talked about in my previous videos, I have created assets of all of my characters so that I can very easily go to my collection, my file of assets, pick out a character, and drag them over to the comic. The characters are created in 2 layers. We have the color layer and the line layer, which you will see in a minute why I do it that way. And then I can just drop them over here and size them as needed. Procreate's not the best with sizing, so I like to have the at least starting file in roughly the size of a panel, and then I can just do a minor size up or size down. If you do too much sizing, then it can kind of start to pixelate both for smaller and larger. For this particular asset, I forget every time that I have not cut out like the tail area, and I cannot remember after I do this to go and do this for the original asset. So we're just gonna erase this out. Apparently every time. I did this again this week. This one I filmed like a month or more ago. I'm still doing this every time I use this asset because God forbid I just go and do it immediately. That's not the way we work here. Anyway, creating assets like this, as I've talked about in my previous videos, enables me to create comics very quickly. So for instance, this one, I am going to speed things up a bit as we get on to the end of it. Start to finish took me 1 hour and 15 minutes, which is really good. This particular comic, the reason I chose this one to film is that it's a good mix of using assets. You'll see me create a new asset and then also doing some level of drawing. So this is not my most intensive episode by any means, but it's also not my easiest one. I wanted you to see kind of the full range. So here, real quick, so you can see, this is why I keep the line layer separate, because I can just erase out her eyebrows and her mouth, and all of a sudden I can have a completely different expression than I had for the original asset. So keeping those line layers and the color layers separate enables me to very quickly change her expression. And that's all you really need to do to change the fairly dramatic change for this character. So that is how I use the assets, why I use them. It enables me to very quickly produce a new comic every week. Obviously, I am doing a slice of life, very simple comic. I hope to someday in the near future be able to do a more complicated narrative-driven one. However, I needed to start somewhere, and I think this was a really good place for me to start, doing a more simple weekly comic that's episodic and based off of characters that I can use over and over again. You will see me here doing a background layer in white. So my general aesthetic with this is I wanted the characters to really, really pop. So all of the characters are in color. The background that I'm drawing here, the background details, I always do in white. And I do fairly minimalist when it comes to backgrounds. This one, I'm going to have a rug and a toy box, and that's all. Sometimes I don't do any background details. Sometimes I do just a line to indicate the floor. I do pretty minimalist in backgrounds because that's just the style I'm looking for to really make the characters pop, and then the background details are just to kind of establish setting or maybe another object to establish that, what they're engaging with. But again, this style enables me to create very regularly. So it just really works for the place and time that I am in. This is me going to see if I have an asset for her toys, and discovering that I do not have an asset for her toys independently. I just had this one of them all together. I think I just had one of like half of the toy. So I'm going to need to create an individual asset for this bird. This bird is a very important toy. This is why I need an asset for it specifically, because Bird shows up in many, many episodes. I guess just not fully full-bodied like this before. Bird is her most beloved of toys. She picked him out herself. We went to the pet store one day, and she ran over and put her little head on Bird. And of course, as a dog mom, I could not say no to that. Like, how was I expected to just leave Bird? I'm not going to do that. So Bird came home with us, and now Bird is her most beloved toy. And so he shows up from time to time in the comic, which is why I'm going through the effort of creating a asset specifically for this little stuffed animal, because I know I'm going to use him again. It's worth creating an additional asset for. I am not going to change Bird's expression, though. He's pretty one note with the expression, so I can go ahead and just make him a single layer. I don't need to create a line layer and a color layer. This is definitely something I'm going to use again, so it makes sense for me to make an additional asset just for Bird. So next, we're going to add some text. We're going to do some dialogue. Again, CMYK hand, size 18 font, and Procreate's tools for writing dialogue, fine. They're not super great. It's not like having a keyboard, but it works for the style I'm doing. If you have a very narrative-driven story that borders on a web novel, it might be good to get yourself an independent keyboard to knock through all of that. But for what I'm doing here, this is perfectly functional. I prefer to do it with the stylus. It's just easier. And I don't have huge amounts of text, obviously. I'm doing, in general, a minimum of 4 panels, sometimes up to like 8, maybe a bit more. But in general, it's like 4 to 8 panels that I do for each comic. If I'm getting into more of that, I'm going to split it into multiple episodes. So again, we're not super heavy on dialogue with this. I apparently have an errant pen stroke here, so we'll just need to get rid of that. All right. I do create the speech bubbles myself. I use the calligraphy monoline brush that's included with Procreate. I put it to size 3. It's a great brush to be included with the program. And I know that some programs have built-in like cloud or speech bubble creators, like I think Clip Studio has something. I know some people buy stamps that are in the shape of various speech bubbles. It's honestly just really easy to make them in Procreate. So that's how I do all of mine. That way I can, I'm not fussing with a lot. I can just manipulate it to whatever size I need it to be. And, with Procreate's tools to make, perfect ellipses or perfect arches, it's really easy just to do that. So I don't bother with buying the stamps for this. Um, Honestly, I saw someone one time showing how to do a speech bubble in Clip Studio, and I think that was their first time and they were just really struggling, but I was just like, no, I cannot spend this much time making speech bubbles. Even for having limited number of speech bubbles per episode, I am not spending that much time. So one of the great things about Procreate, how easy it is to make speech bubbles. Next, we are going to grab my spacer. So how much you scroll in between panels is up to you. I did some test runs. I came up with a specific amount that I wanted space-wise between each panel, and I wanted that to be the same every single episode. So I just created this line that I pull from one comic to the next, week to week. For this style of comic, I do think it's very important to have the panels uniformly sized. Panels themselves, I will do different sizes. That was wrong. The spacing between the panels, I like to have universally sized. If you're doing narrative driven, if you're doing something a little more freeform, that can be something that you can manipulate to be based off of what you think serves that narrative, and whether you want like a larger break between panels for more dramatic like heft or whatever. That is up to you. But for this particular type, where the format of the comic is the same every single week, I think it is really important to have that be a very specific, size week to week. So I've just created myself that little line. I transfer it to each one, and it works great to make sure that I am keeping on track with stuff like that. There are things that I think traditionally are just good to make consistent. It's the same with the panels themselves, and making sure that like each week is this different color, but in like the same like 4 color ranges. I just try to like have certain things that are consistent week to week. So here we have yet another asset. It took me roughly 10 episodes to get a fair amount of assets built up for Casey, the main character here. So obviously in the beginning, I was drawing quite a bit more than I am right now because I had to create so many of her, the original asset. So, for those first 10 episodes, I was doing new Casey body poses for each one. But after 10, I had a really good amount built up to make this much easier. I've added maybe 2 or 3 more since then, which I'm on like episode 56. So you can see how versatile you can use these over and over again. Now, I have a number of other characters that I've created since then as well. But at this phase, I'm creating a new drawing maybe like once every 6 to 8 weeks. I need usually a new character, like a new dog, occasionally a new Casey if she's having her do something, that hasn't been done in a previous comic. So it is a pretty, functional system for me. My previous 2 videos are one on like how I use these assets, so you're getting a pretty good idea here. I also have a episode or a video on like how I create those assets and how I create new characters, and how I start with a pretty basic outline, and then I can use that to then create a bunch of different characters or create a bunch of different poses for that character. Like, this is just my way of doing this. One of my biggest pet peeves is like people saying, this is how you should do this. Because I used to, like, as a younger person, think that meant you should do it that way. And then what I discovered is actually like when it comes to a creative process, it's great to give people like ideas of like, hey, this is what I do for my creative process that really works for me. But the point really is to find a creative process that works for you. Don't reinvent the wheel every single time, but also everyone's wheel is a little bit different. So this is my wheel for creating comics. I will also note here, while I use the monoline brush for speech bubbles, for the outlining of the dogs and for all of these background elements, I use another brush that is included with Procreate. It is called Gloaming, and it can be found in the drawing set that comes with Procreate. It's just a fantastic brush. I use it for so much. It's got just the right amount of texture to it. where it doesn't look very like computery. It has like a nice pencil feel to it without being too much, because sometimes the sketch brushes that are supposed to look like pencil or whatever, just like they're too grainy for me, and I don't feel like they have enough weight to them. So I have gloaming here, and I have it set to 3. And I just feel like it's a really nice weight and has really good texture to it. And again, included with the program. So that's fantastic. I have bought many pens over the years for the fun of it, and I find that I still consistently go back to the original pens that are included with Procreate. So just this program's so darn solid. Like, let's just take a moment to appreciate how solid this is. For coloring, I use the selection tool. So I'll select my color, then I'll select the selection tool, and just on a separate layer, like a layer under the outline, I will outline the object, and you just keep moving forward until you all come around and meet, and you're automatically filled in. That is how I do all of my coloring, including for the dogs themselves. And the color layer I do as one solid layer. So like all of the colors you see on Casey are all one layer, but I do that with that format or that function of just doing a selection and then color filling in essence. And it just makes color super quick. Yes, you can do the drop and drag color function that Procreate has. I just found I was always fussing with that. First of all, like if you're going to do a separate layer for color like I do, you're already going to be drawing an outline that you then have to color fill. And often, like if you're using an outline that has any kind of texture, then color fill will get frustrated with that. If you don't have your lines perfectly aligned, then it's not going to color fill. There's just a lot of reasons why color fill can get a bit frustrating. And so doing it with the selection tool rather than dragging over the color and dropping it just made my life a lot less stressful. So I am going to, from here, put this on extra fast so you can see the rest of the process. I did want you to give the entire process. The only thing, I clipped out a couple of spaces of me just like wandering around the iPad looking for something. So I did edit that out for your good. So you don't have to sit through me trying to find things. But otherwise, I wanted to have the entire process that I go through start to finish so you can see like what that looks like. But I think from here, we've got the general gist of what's going on, and you can watch that and see how you feel. I will say the only additional thing that you're going to see, it's a little different, is much like I have a logo that I drag from one episode to the next at the beginning, I also have an end of episode asset that I will drag from one to the next, just to end everything off with, general sign off. This was written by me. Here's other places that you can find me. So that's just the one element you will see at the very end that we have not discussed yet. Otherwise, please enjoy the drawing, and hopefully, this is actually the second time I've recorded this voiceover. The first time I recorded it, walked back over to my desk, clicked some button, and immediately deleted it. So I'm really hoping that this is good. We're good. This is all I need. Oh, I will just notice now that I'm noticing myself. I do make every panel a group. Sorry, I keep saying I'm done, but I'm not quite. Every panel I make a group. This makes it really easy for me to manipulate the panels when I need to create or move the panels around or duplicate them and use the same one over and over again. So definitely make your life a lot easier. Do that. Also, I should note, man, I was not done. The size of this one document is not the maximum size of a document you can use. You just need to duplicate this and create however many files you want that will ultimately fit together to create one long scroll. And in part 2 of this, I'm going to go over how you create that one long scroll from multiples. It's just, you can't indefinitely make a larger and larger document because you're going to reduce the number of layers you can do down to like where it's not going to be functional anymore. So this way of doing it, where you just have, 3 or 4, in my case, documents that are 1600 by 12,000 wide, just creates a file that's functional that I can use. I can put at least usually like 3 panels in per episode, or per document, I can put 3 panels in, sometimes 4, depending on the size I'm doing. Um, and then I can just create multiples of those and link them together. In general, I'm at max doing like 8. I think I had one that was 10. But max, that's what I'm doing. And then I'm going to create a like part 2 if I need more than that. Again, for this style. Now, if you're doing narrative form and you need a lot more, like Webtoons and Tapas file size that you can upload is pretty large. So you can do quite a lot. I'm sorry, I don't remember off the top of my head what their file size are, but I will include that in the description. So you have a lot of space to work with in terms of what you can create if you need it to be much longer than this. This is just my file size, not going to be as large because I'm not putting a ton of panels in. So you will see me duplicate this document once I'm done with it. And that would be for creating the additional panels I need for this episode. I usually do duplicate what I've already done so that I have like the color already there, and if I need to like reuse an asset and just change a expression, already there. I'm not having to re-drag and drop them over from anything. So yeah, you can create quite a few of this size document before you're going to hit a file size limit. Anyway, now I think we are done, and we will move into watching the rest of the process. Let's see, maybe 8 times speed. We'll see. We'll see how that goes. Thank you for joining me. And again, look out for the next video next month, where we talk about how we take these images and convert them into one long scrollable one for Webtoons or Tapas, and how we upload those. I will see you next time.